Welcome to day 2 of the 2025 AGTA American Gem Trade Association Inspire Seminar Series, sponsored by the AGS, the American Gem Society. Describing Color in Gems, a Fool's Guide. With us this morning is Richard Hughes, founder of Lotus Gemology and one of the world's foremost experts on ruby, sapphire, and jade. Richard is the author of many books and over 170 articles. His writings and photographs have appeared in a diverse range of publications, and he has received numerous industry awards. In 2010, Richard was the recipient of the Antonio C. Bonanno Award for Excellence in Gemology from the Accredited Gemologist Association. The Association Française named Richard one of the 50 most important figures that have shaped the history of gems since antiquity. I didn't know you were that old. Richard was also awarded a visiting professorship at Shanghai's Tongji University. 2017 saw the publication of Richard and his wife and daughter's Ruby and Sapphire, a gemologist's guide, arguably the most complete book ever published on a single gem species, and the culmination of nearly 4 decades of work in gemology, an exceptional book. In 2018, Richard was named Photographer of the Year by the GEMA, that's the Gemological Association of Great Britain. In 2022, Richard published Jade, a Gemologist's Guide, and 2024 saw the publication of Broken Bangle, the blunder-besmirched history of jade nomenclature, another excellent work. Richard founded Bangkok's Lotus Gemology in 2014 with his wife Wimon and daughter Billy. Lotus Gemology specializes in testing of colored gemstones. Please join me in welcoming Richard Hughes.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary.
You're welcome, Dick.
Okay, let's have some fun with color today. And we have no sound. There we go. There we go. Okay, we're going to have a little fun. Okay, thanks to the AGTA, Gary, of course, Shelley Sargent for putting on these programs. I want to talk about something that happened to me this morning. I was in the lift coming down from my room, and I ran into this gentleman. And I asked him, I said, you know, you kind of look like a tough guy. And he told me, no, I'm a banker. And I said, I need some tough guys this morning to help me out. And he said, well, he had some Antifa friends that were just out of work, and they might be able to help. So we had a meeting in the basement of a pizza parlor, and I hired a few of them, and they're standing back and standing by outside the doors there in case anybody tries to leave early. So just remember, you're here and down for the count. I told them not to be too gentle with you if you try to leave. Don't worry about hitting your head on the door frame or anything like that. Let's get started. Don't you love social media? This is a sample, a real sample from a few years ago after I was involuntarily jumped into a Facebook group. So this person said, look at this paparazzi. And they posted a photo that was like a photo of a photo of a photo, and it was crooked and it was out of focus. They said, this isn't a pod, it's not even close. I said, well, you know, it's kind of tough to describe color. And if you haven't seen the stone, it's difficult. He said, fool, why can't you gemologists just use a Pantone color book? Well, as Einstein said, 2 things are infinite, universe and human stupidity. Not quite sure about the universe. So with that said, welcome to Describing Color in Gems, a Fool's Guide. And of course, we need to get our facts first, and after that, we'll deal with the distortions. And so now I'll give you the key to the wiggly worm. All right, this is an introduction to spectroscopy, which is something we use in our lab every day. And at the end, I hope everybody can say you do know Jack about color. Three keys to color. We have a light source, we have an object, and we have the eye and brain and what all goes on in there. Okay? Those are the three factors that affect color. The light source, of course, there are many different kinds of light sources. The object, there are many different kinds of objects and the way they absorb light and reflect light and transmit light. And then, of course, the eye and brain, and this one can cause all kinds of problems, much greater than the others. But if any of these three things change, the color is going to change. We humans can see about 2 million colors. We see more than any other mammals, any other animals on Earth. Okay? But our range of seeing color is limited to about 400 to 700 nanometers. Some animals can see into the infrared. Some insects actually can see deep into the ultraviolet. Early animals, the first life forms, they actually had sensors for ultraviolet, and it's believed that this is because they were trying to get away from it because it damaged their cells. And so they developed ultraviolet sensors. And they've still found primitive animals deep inside the earth that still have these ultraviolet sensors. So we can see more than any other animal. Let's talk about light sources first, okay? You may have heard this word, color rendering index. And some people talk about, oh, this light bulb has a color rendering index of 95 or 99. Ignore that. It means nothing. The only way to characterize a light source is to look at the spectral power distribution curve. And this is what it looks like for daylight. So you can see it's relatively balanced. The black areas on the ends, those are the areas our eyes can't see into. But the places where we can see, it's relatively balanced. And so that's what daylight looks like. Now, what about an incandescent bulb? Well, you can see it's very heavily weighted towards the red end of the spectrum, and it's very weak in the green, blue, and violet. And so that's going to have a dramatic impact on the way a stone appears. A halogen bulb is basically the same. So if you're using an incandescent light or a halogen light, which is a form of incandescent light, you're going to have a tinted yellow color to the light. Fluorescent lights, which we have all around us, these trick our eyes. They put phosphors inside a bulb, and then they have a mercury vapor inside the bulb, and it causes those phosphors to fluoresce. The fluorescence is emission in a very specific part of the spectrum. And if you have those spread out across the spectrum, our eye sees that as being white. But in fact, they're very weak in certain wavelengths, and so you can get all kinds of wild color shifts when you're using fluorescent lights to view color. So it's not a very good light source for judging color. This is what LEDs look like. This is a cool white LED. You can see that it's got strong in the blue and violet, but it has very little in the red, the end of the red. This is a warm LED, and it's the opposite. LEDs have all kinds of manufacturing problems, and so this is why they're not generally used for critical color work. That may change in the future, but that's the way it is now. This is a xenon light. I think most of you have never even heard of this. These are used in television studios and things like that because there's one thing that human beings know, and that's the color of skin. And if you don't get the skin color right, everything looks off. And so xenon lamps have a relatively balanced spectrum, and they're used in instruments like spectrophotometers and things like that. They are the best artificial light source we have, and they've been almost entirely ignored by the gemstone business. So these are the different light sources available, and you can see very clearly that the xenon source is the closest match to daylight. Now, what about measuring color? How do we measure color? Well, Isaac Newton was the first one. He discovered that white light, if you pass it through a prism, it gets split into a rainbow of colors, ranging from violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. And so that was the first major breakthrough in describing color. that white light is not just white, but it's made of colors. Then this gentleman, Fraunhofer, and actually Wollaston a little bit earlier, they noticed that when they looked through a prism of sunlight coming through the prism, there were these black lines. And those became known as Fraunhofer lines. They're caused by the elements surrounding the sun and also the Earth's atmosphere, and they absorb light in very specific places. This is the first absorption spectrum. In the laboratory, gemologists traditionally have used the instrument on the left, and for most appraisers, that's all you're familiar with, is the handheld spectroscope. But for advanced laboratory, and of course for scientists for decades, they've been using an instrument called a spectrophotometer. And a spectrophotometer is better. Spectrophotometers measure photons, okay, and they display the results in a graph format. Let's start with a simple example of that. Okay, the red line at the bottom is the absorption. In this particular stone, you can see the absorption is 0. It's flat all the way across. And so the result of that is a white color. Okay, now let's look at the opposite example. If it absorbs all the way across and absorbs near 100%, our eye sees that as black. Basically, it's no light coming to our eyes. In between, if the curve is still flat and it's somewhere in between, you get a grayscale, okay? One person mentioned to me a few weeks ago, he said, well, brown should be considered part of tone. No, brown is not a tonal value. Tonal values are achromatic, okay? This is a lightness to darkness scale. And so if that curve is flat, it's either going to be white, black, or a shade of gray. This is achromatic. It has no color. It's one of the 3 elements of color, describing color. Color, as we call it or know it, it is created when the worm wiggles. So let's add a dash of wiggle. Here we can see the absorption spectrum of a ruby. And if you look down below, you can see the colors that are coming out of the ruby. On the right-hand side, you can see that the white light sends all the colors into the stone, but only the blue, orange, and red come out. And if you look at the spectrum, you can see that there's a narrow transmission window in the blue, and there's a broad transmission window in the red. And that results in the color of ruby, which is a slightly bluish red color. So that's how we get color. Here's a blue sapphire. You can see there's an absorption band at about 450 in the blue, and then there's this spike down in the red. That's an emission line. That's caused by fluorescence. The other thing I want to point out here is that a blue stone that absorbs blue light is not a good thing, okay? And so the stronger the absorption at that 450 area, the stronger that is, the lower quality of the blue that you're going to see. And this is the fluorescence. Okay, ruby and some sapphires and spinels, they fluoresce to visible light. This is a blue laser going into the stone. There's no red light in the blue laser, but the stone spits it out as red light. That's fluorescence. So now you understand what fluorescence is. Now, what are the benefits of spectrometry versus a hand spectroscope that gemologists typically use? Well, range. A spectrophotometer can see in the dark. It can see in the areas, the ultraviolet, the infrared, even further, okay? And so it can find things that our eyes just can't see. Accuracy. It allows you much more accurate measurements. Patterns. And this is where it's really important. You're able to see broad patterns with a spectrophotometer that you can't see at all in a hand spectroscope. Here's an example. 2 neon blue tourmalines. One of them is colored by copper and the other is not. You can see that in the visible range, going from the blue up to the red, they're fairly similar. But outside that range, they're very radically different. And so a spectrophotometer can easily separate a Cooperian tourmaline from a non-Cooperian tourmaline. So that's one of the things it can do. Now, what makes a color vivid? Of course, this is a great concern to us as gemologists and gem dealers and jewelers. What makes a color vivid? This is a cobalt blue spinel. Look at the steepness of the curve. Look at the relief of the curve. That's what makes a color vivid. Now, what if it were a lighter color with the same chromophore, cobalt? It would look like that. The flatter the curve goes, the more it goes to gray. And generally speaking, for colored gemstones, gray is not the best thing. So the steepness of the curve controls the saturation. The relief between the areas of transmission and the areas of absorption, and the steeper the curve, the more neon or vivid the color is going to be. But color doesn't just depend on the object. No, no, no. Also, there's the viewer and the light source. There are a lot of little quirks that color has. This is something called metamerism. Okay? You can have two stones. They look exactly alike under one light source, but you change the light source and suddenly they're different. These are called metameric pairs. Metameric pairs do the wiggly worm. Look at this. You can see the general trend of the spectrum is the same, but they cross. And when the spectra cross 3 times or more, they form a metameric pair. Okay? What about classifying color? Well, since time immemorial, scientists have worked out different systems for classifying color. The one that's probably the most well-known is the Munsell system. It's used by Gem World for their color book, which is a very nice book, by the way. And so this was developed by Albert Munsell, who was an artist, and he invented the Munsell color system. What you want to know about it is he tried to create a visual system where different spots were of equal spacing. So a different chip, if you had one chip and then the next one, it would be equally spaced visually, according to what our eyes see. Originally, he thought we'll make a perfect sphere, okay? And then he learned it doesn't work like that. And so this is from his original book, and you can see that the sphere is distorted now. Because in order to get that equal spacing visually, he had to create more colors in certain directions than others. And so these are the 3 factors. Almost every color science system today works on the same 3 factors: hue, saturation, tone, or in the case of Munsell, he called it chroma, value, and hue. Okay? And this is what it is. The hue position is the color on a color wheel, red, green, blue, and so forth. The tonal value goes from 0 at the bottom to 10. So it goes from black to white or colorless. And the saturation is how far out from the achromatic color does it go. And that Munsell called chroma. We usually call it saturation. And so you can see this is what his system looked like. It's not a perfect sphere. Some colors are naturally lighter than others. So yellow is a naturally lighter color than violet. Green and red, they're about equal. And so when you have a high saturation emerald or a high saturation ruby, usually they have the same tone or a similar tone. And so you can see how this works out. You can see the yellow color is a higher tone, the blue color is a darker tone. But it's not a perfectly symmetrical sphere. Pantone. Let me talk a little bit about Pantone. Pantone in the printing business is known as a process color. It's a pre-configured ink that will produce a certain color. So they mix the inks together in advance and you get a certain color. Why is this important? If you're Coca-Cola, you want that red color on every can to match. You want that red color on the case, on the paper, the cardboard, and everything to match. So they use Pantone colors, process colors. These are pre-mixed colors. It in no way, shape, or form can be used for grading gemstones. Pantone's for fools. Okay, now we've got our facts. Let's have a little fun with facts and what people believe about color. So many people, they believe universal grading standards are possible. We have this in diamond grading, right? We have the color, the cut, the clarity, the carat weight, the 4 C's. In diamonds, let's look at color. There is almost none. So we can kind of erase that. There's no color zoning to speak of. There's no pleochroism because it's singly refractive. The clarity, there are generally no eye-visible inclusions. There's no textural differences. There's no cloudiness in some stones. What about the cut? They're perfectly symmetrical. They're cut to standard proportions. They have only tiny naturals on the stone. Now let's take a look at colored stones. What about colored stones? Color. It goes everywhere from none to extremely strong, every single tone in between. There's color zoning, sometimes very strong. There's pleochroism. You have eye-visible inclusions. You have texture differences. In terms of cutting, all shapes, asymmetrical proportions. You have from tiny to huge naturals. It is entirely different than a diamond. In other words, faceted colored stones are hugely more complex to describe than diamonds. What about master sets? In diamonds, they have master sets, right? Are master sets comparable to the stone tested? This is a big thing. And if you've been through diamond grading class, you know that the stones have to be comparable to the masters in size and shape. Okay, are they comparable with diamonds? Yeah. You can see how it works. No problem there. Colored stone master sets? I mean, just try creating one. It's a nightmare. So are they comparable to the stone tested? No. You cannot create, it's physically impossible to create a decent colored stone master set, okay, because of so many different variations. It's like comparing apples to a durian. It just doesn't work, okay? You cannot create colored stone grading master sets. Many laboratories have tried. I have tried myself. It just doesn't work. So colored stone master sets masters do not typically match the stones tested. They don't match in size, they don't match in cut, they don't match inclusions, they don't match zoning, orientation, none of this stuff. Trying to organize faceted colored gemstones is like organizing fine art. Like this. Okay, what is this? Which category are we going to put it in? Well, I see, it looks like it's on the seaside. Is that, a coastline there? Maybe we'll call it landscape. But there is a person there, so it's a portrait. Do I detect a little emotional overtone? Possibly. We'll put it in the landscape portrait with emotion. Okay, you see what it is. Only the broadest of categories are possible to organize fine art. The same is true for colored stones. Let's talk about some color quirks, okay? Which of these colors is brighter? Okay, does anybody want to venture a guess? Which is the brightest? Okay, I don't hear anything from anybody, but that doesn't matter because you're all wrong. They're all the same, okay? If you measure the tonal value of each of those colors, which is the amount of light that they absorb, they're all the same. Of course, our eyes don't see it that way. Our eye tricks us, okay? This is a fun one. Look at the spinning pink balls. Now, focus on the black dot in the center. And suddenly, ooh, now one of the balls is green. Okay, our eyes trick us. The Purkinje effect. This was a Czech doctor, and he noted that when he went walking in the fields in the early morning, the colors of flowers appeared more blue. This is because our eyes, when you're in a low light situation, our eyes are switching from our color vision to our grayscale vision, from the cones to the rods in our eyes, and so the color changes. So you can see that there are lots of complications for color. I love this one. Too many margaritas last night? Some people may look at this and they may start to feel sick. Just remember that you can't leave the room because these guys are waiting for you outside. But this is actually a static image. It is not moving. But I think everyone in the room here can see it move. Okay? So the truth is, we really cannot believe our own eyes. Our eyes do not give us the true picture. I love this. I call this the old chestnut. Gems can be graded by comparing to photos or printed images. Now, we have every possible system that's been devised to do this in our laboratory, and they are still inadequate. We have the color codex from Chris Smith. We have the GIA's gem set. We have the World of Color. We have a Munsell Atlas. We have everything, okay? It just doesn't work. When you're comparing something like a gemstone, a faceted gemstone, to a flat object printed on a page, it just doesn't work. What are some of the problems? Well, the main thing is a gamut problem to start with, okay? This diagram shows you a CIE color where you have white in the center and then the higher saturation colors go out to the outside. And these polygons inside are designed to show you what can be done. The black polygon represents the best quality you can get from a color monitor. These are broadcast quality monitors that cost thousands of dollars, and these are the colors that you can see. Look at the green area. It's completely out of gamut for even the best color monitors. And so people who say, oh yeah, I'm going to make an online system and I'm going to show you the color online, you're going to look at it with your phone or your computer at home or whatever it is, cannot do it. Because there are so many colors that are out of gamut, and these colors are often the most expensive in gemstones. They simply cannot be represented by a color monitor. Printing on paper, even worse. Look at the red polygon. That's the printing gamut for a 4-color printing process. It's extremely restrictive. Anyone who's done any printing knows you cannot print an emerald green or a sapphire blue, like a Burmese sapphire blue. They're out of gamut colors. You just can't reproduce them on paper. Other problems, the inks fade, the paper turns yellow over time. There are sample-to-sample variations from one set to the next. The samples are opaque, the faceted gems are not. But most important, and if you take away nothing else from my talk today, I want you to understand this. This is top secret. Faceted gems are not one color. Okay? That's important. Here's an example. Here's a faceted blue sapphire, and it has a fairly even color for a faceted blue sapphire. I'm going to make it real simple for you. I'm going to pixelate it. How many colors can you see? And the thing is that if you move the stone even a little bit, every one of those colors is going to change. Every single one of them. If you move your head, if you change the light source type or the position of the light source, every one of those colors is going to change. Because faceted colored gemstones are 3-dimensional mosaics. They're incredibly complex. And so describing them is like, they're optical echo chambers. Describing them, it's like trying to describe the wind. Okay? Here's another common belief. Trace element analysis can be used as part of definitions for things like pigeon's blood and cobalt blue and Paraíba. Problems with this? There are major problems. First problem, number one, is that even today, we don't really understand the cause of color in certain gemstones. Let me give you some examples. Emerald. Okay, when I started learning gemology 45 years ago, emerald was colored by chromium, right? That's what we learned until we didn't learn it. Now it's colored by chromium and or vanadium. What will be happening in 10 or 20 years from now? We don't know. So to try to define the color of a gemstone by its chromophore is fool's play. Yellow sapphire, okay? Iron, that was the cause before, and then this gentleman came into our lives. John is sitting here at the front row. Take a bow. And so John showed us, demonstrated to us, that it is the trapped hole color centers that produce the color in yellow sapphire more so than iron. Now, another problem, and this is a huge problem. These kind of definitions of you have to have 5% of this or 0.5% of that in the stone to be considered such and such, they completely ignore the issue of path length. Take a look at this. Here is a plate of plastic, okay? You can see in the top right, it's a pale blue color, but on the edge, it's a deep, you could call it a cobalt blue, okay? Why is that? Because the light going through the face of the plate has a very short path length, but the light traveling down along the edge has a path length 50 or 100 times longer. And so even though the chromophore has not changed at all, and the percentage of the chromophore has not changed at all, the colors are radically different depending on the path length. Here's 3 pieces of plastic. They're all the same color, but they're stacked on top of one another. And so because of the increased path length, the color changes dramatically. Ruby. These both have 0.3% chromium in them. Why are they different colors? Because one is bigger than the other one, so the path length is much greater. Longer path length, more absorption, more color. Javahirjian is probably the biggest manufacturer of synthetic corundum in the world. Okay? They make many, many colors of ruby. Why do you think they make so many colors of ruby? Just because people like different colors? No. It's because if you want to cut a small stone and a big stone of the same color, you need 2 different chromophore concentrations. Okay? And so that's why they do it. So you cannot ignore path length. It is extremely important. And when it comes to faceted colored gemstones, how do you measure path length? My God, the light is bouncing all around here and there. It's crazy. Just can't do it. So chromophore percentages cannot be used to describe color in faceted stones. This is a good one. Standard light source is essential for colored stone grading. It's obvious, isn't it? And it is important, okay? The typical light source used in labs, it's a 20-watt lamp. It's a fluorescent lamp. Gem held face up at a 30 centimeter difference, so they want to stabilize the viewing geometry. 5,000 K color temperature, it's a white light. 2200 lux, that's the amount of light falling on the stone. That's a measure of the amount of light hitting the stone. That's good. There's a fixed viewing geometry. All this is great stuff. Okay? And this is the device that we use. And you're supposed to put your stone down there in the box, and if you stand over there where that guy is standing, you're not going to see crap. Okay? Because we don't look at colored stones that way. We want the light above us, and we're looking at it like this. We have the sun, and it comes down on the stone, and we're right above it. Okay? Can you imagine doing that in the box? Okay? Believe me, we've tried. Okay, for gems, our environment is top lit. The box is top lit, which is great if you're trained as a contortionist. If you can climb in that box and look at it like that, okay. And, of course, faceted stones are designed to be viewed from above. To use the box, you must become one with the box. Takes years of training. I know. Okay, so the lesson here, these light boxes are garbage. You cannot view a faceted colored stone in these light boxes. The geometry is all wrong. What about dealer standard lighting? Oh, this is fun. Okay, here's the typical gem dealer standard. Natural daylight through a window or outdoors. Spectral composition, it changes throughout the day. Could be cloudy sometimes. Viewed in all positions, 6,000 lux through a typical window on a decent day. It's 3 times more than a light box. No direction home, okay? Might look at it this way, maybe over here, a little bit there, a little bit there. And a cigarette in the mouth, that's optional. Okay, so the fact is that gem dealers and labs use entirely different lighting conditions, and this is a prescription for a headache. Okay, you want to know why dealers don't agree with the color calls that labs make? Well, this is part of it. For labs, you know, consistency is the goal, isn't it? I think when many people hear from labs, they want to be consistent. Well, how are we doing? If you ask the typical gem dealer, not too good. Okay, now in China, they have this wonderful thing, they call it gongxi. It's a scholar's rock. And these are very abstract, irregular rocks, and they're designed to be put in a scholar's studio where the scholar can look at it and get ideas. Because it's so abstract, you can look at it in a million different ways, and you get inspiration from that. This is what they said about this. One gentleman, he said, if the rock doesn't seem like a painting by the powers of nature, then discard it. So these are beautiful things that they have. Classification helps us organize ideas. Ideas, in some ways, are like gongxi, they're like scholars' rocks. Some ideas are beyond classification. We need to recognize that. Look at this. Here's a set of numbers. We like to reduce things to numbers, don't we? As human beings, and particularly for graders, we want to have numbers. We don't want to have some nebulous something or other. We want to have numbers. How about these numbers? I think for everybody in the audience, for the Americans, the top set is probably the one you want to look at. The rest of the world looks at the bottom set. And we know what this means, right? Okay? Numbers don't tell us everything. All right? They don't tell us what's special. Colored stones are not diamonds. They're more like gongxi. So what is beauty? And this is at the heart of our industry. What is beauty? Beauty is attraction. Okay? Know what this is? This is a black diamond. When I first got involved in the business, black diamonds were worthless. Okay? And now they can be quite expensive. They're a major part of the jewelry industry. Okay? When I was writing this book with Vlad Yavorsky, he gave me a lot of photographs of stones that were in the book, and he had some of them that were gray, like this. And I said, Vlad, you have so many beautiful, beautiful spinels. Why do you want to put these gray stones in the book? And he said something I'll never forget. He said, I think gray is beautiful. I couldn't argue with that, right? So what is beauty? Okay, for people in the audience, who's the most handsome person here? 1, 2, or 3? Well, there you go. There you go. Okay, let's examine the other sex. Who is the most beautiful lady? Okay, 1, 2, or 3. Perhaps you'd like number 4. Okay? I think if you look at the people here and we were to do a poll, no one would share exactly the same taste. Okay? Speaking of taste, they had a contest in 2013. They had 2,300 wines entered into this contest. And the wine that won the contest was from Trader Joe's, and we call it $2 Chuck because it's $2 a bottle. Okay? So what does this tell us? $2 Chuck, it's the world's best wine, right? Or wine tasting is highly subjective. You see how this is like with colored stones? It's highly subjective. Expecting some universal standard to drop down out of heaven is a fool's errand. In fact, beauty, taste is a personal choice. As El-Biruni, the great Central Asian gemologist, said 1,000 years ago, every country carries its own ideas. And you can see this in the gem trade as well. Different places have different preferences. So let's talk now about these color types, right? The Paraíba, the cobalt blue, pigeon's blood, Santa Maria. Okay, let's start with Paraíba. Okay, that's this neon blue-green tourmaline that came out of Brazil. It was discovered by Heitor Barbosa in the 1980s, I believe, and it set the gem world on fire. Okay, and so now we have all these stones coming into our lab, and we're supposed to decide which is Paraíba and which isn't. And most labs, they simply go by whether they can detect copper or not. So which of these tourmalines that you see here are colored by copper? Well, there you go. There you have it. You can get similar colors with different chromophores. Now, I'm not trying to say that a fine Paraíba isn't something really special. It is very special, okay? But when you get into the less saturated colors, the picture becomes far more muddy. And then when you get into the low end, these are listings that I pulled off of eBay a while back. They were all listed as having lab reports saying that they were Paraíba or Paraíba-type tourmalines. Do you think that if Heitor Barbosa had dug up one of these pieces, he would have thought it was special? No, I don't think so. But this is what our trade is doing to the word Paraíba today. We're destroying the value of it. Why didn't this stone, which was one of those 5 I just showed you, why didn't this stone cause a stir in the market when it first appeared? Because it wasn't special. It wasn't special. Now, I know one thing. I've never met Mr. Barbosa, okay? But I know one thing for a fact. When he dug up the first piece of Paraíba, he didn't go, Jesus, look at the copper. Of course not. Paraíba is special because of the color, not the chromophore. And so to judge Paraíba, you have to look at the color. And I've just demonstrated to you a little bit about how difficult that is. What about cobalt blue? That's the rage. Stuart mentioned that earlier in his talk. There was a question from the audience. What about cobalt blue? Okay. Which of these spinels contain cobalt? Okay. Well, the answer is all of them. The question we should be asking is which of these are special? Which of these are something really special? Not which stones contain cobalt. Santa Maria aquamarine, that's another one. My friends at Gem World, they did this wonderful article a few months back where they focused on Santa Maria. Santa Maria was a mine in Brazil, and they dug up aquamarines that didn't look like aquamarine. That's what made them special, okay? But this definition is being bastardized now, and in the same article they had this color chart, and this was from a laboratory where they're trying to show you which stones that they would classify as Santa Maria. I ask you this question: which stones don't look like aquamarine? Okay? That's the question. And in my opinion, these all look like aquamarines. None of them look like that sapphire blue from the previous slide at the top. Okay? Is the lab wrong? No. It's their opinion. Each of us has our own taste. There is no wrong taste. What about pigeon's blood? That's another one. That's a favorite, isn't it? Well, again, my friends at Gemworld, they did this nice study, okay, of this. But let me just give you a little bit of the history. In Burma, they had a classification system. It goes back hundreds of years. And the top color, the very best color that they considered the very best, was called pigeon's blood. Number 2 color was called rabbit's blood. It's a little bit darker, okay? And then they went down through a whole bunch of different categories. One color was the first 3 pumps of the water that come out of a pump, meaning it's going to be a little rusty colored, okay? But at the very bottom, they had this thing called kolongo. And it has an interesting derivation because in Burma previously, the Indian buyers would buy the very dark stones. And this category, if you translate it, it translates into even an Indian would cry. Meaning the stone is so dark that even the Indians would cry when they looked at it. Okay? So they did have a classification system, and I want to point out that pigeon's blood was not all the stones. It wasn't every stone they produced from the mine. It was only what they considered the very finest. And so my friends at Gemworld, they decided that they would test this out. They did a little survey. And in 2015, they surveyed about 550 rubies between 1 and 2.5 carats each. 90% came with a lab report describing it as pigeon's blood. So 90%. That's great, isn't it? I'd like to find that mine. Okay. And the per carat price, this is where it gets fun, goes from $450 a carat to $50,000 a carat, effectively making the term pigeon's blood meaningless. 90% pigeon's blood. A $450 to $50,000 a carat. So what does pigeon's blood mean? It doesn't mean anything at that point. When everything is special, nothing is special. Let's go way back in time, okay? Anybody know who this is? Anybody in the audience know who this guy is? You should, okay? Because he's got a stone named after him, Alexandrite. Okay, this is the Tsar Alexander II, all right? And when he was in power, they found this stone in Russia, and it had this odd property that it changed color under different light sources. And if you look at the spectra of stones that change color under different light sources, you see they all have a common feature, which is a big absorption in the yellow area of the spectrum. But you can see the ones that are going to be better are the ones that have the relief in the spectrum. The flatter the curve, the more grayish the stone, and the less the color changes. Color scientists, and of course those who might wear the occasional python boot, nod to Frank Zappa, they know this exquisite effect as color inconstancy. We call it color change, okay? And what it means is that when you have an object and it looks one way under one light source and the color changes under a different one, that's what we call a color change. Does anybody know who this is? Anybody? Boy, okay. This is Prince Vijaya of Sri Lanka. He lived about 2,500 years ago. You know, Sri Lanka's been producing gems for at least 2,500 years, and they do produce this gem we call Alexandrite. And so they've been digging this stuff up in Sri Lanka for 2,500 years. And so why isn't Alexandrite called Vijayite? Because the Sri Lankan kind wasn't special. It wasn't special enough for them to separate it from the pack. So, in summary, are universal grading standards possible? No. Describing gems is like describing the wind. It's really tough. Does anybody know what this is? No, it's complete silence. I'm not sure. Is everybody awake? This is a fire badge, okay? It used to be that fire departments were privately owned. And so you had to pay a company to protect your house. And when you paid that company, you put this badge on the outside of your house. And so when the fire was raging in your neighborhood, the truck would roll up, and if you didn't have the badge out, they wouldn't put the fire out. That's the way it was. It was unregulated, okay? Police departments, it was the same thing. They were all privately run. And what they found was that with both police departments and fire departments, the police department started robbing people, and the fire department started setting fires. And so humans, we realized we need to regulate this. We can't have just anything goes situation. And so they developed regulations to help protect us. We see this in the taxi sphere. There's always some idiot who comes along and he thinks he has a better idea and he's going to solve a bunch of problems. And so, hey, it costs a lot of money to get a taxi license. A driver has to be trained. In London, the training is extremely extensive to drive a cab there. Why don't we just hire ordinary people? They can use their own vehicles and drive around and pick you up. We don't have to pay them the kind of wages. We'll call them independent contractors. And so we don't have to pay them all the things that regular labor is protected by. We don't have to do any of that. That's what Uber is, okay? But then you find out that maybe the driver rapes one of his passengers, maybe his vehicle's broken down, doesn't work very well, all the kinds of things. Maybe he runs into somebody and it's not properly insured for his passenger. That's regulation. All that happens for a reason, because somebody is abusing something. And so we end up regulating things to prevent abuse. First color type, the blue-white diamond. And I don't know if any of you know the history of this, but back around the turn of the century up through the 1920s and 30s, the blue-white diamond was considered the most valuable diamond, and people started charging a premium for them, and so every diamond became a blue-white diamond. Finally, in 1938, we had regulation. FTC stepped in and said, no more. If your diamond isn't really blue, you cannot use the term blue-white for it. Completely stopped the use of that term. I think we have to ask ourselves, are we at that point in the colored stone business? With these terms like Paraíba tourmaline, cobalt blue spinel, pigeon's blood ruby, Santa Maria aquamarine. We're getting there. We're getting there. And believe me, if we continue to abuse this as a trade the way we have been doing, we're in danger of regulation. And that brings us back to diamonds and China. I have a lot of contact with people in China. I go there frequently. Of course, when China started opening up their economy, the world saw the greatest economic expansion in the history of the planet in a very short period of time. It's the world's biggest population. All of a sudden, they're buying a lot of stuff. We've never seen economic expansion like this in history. No other time in history. Okay? So people started to regard that as normal, this double-digit growth every year and that kind of thing. And the gem industry benefited tremendously from the opening up of the Chinese market. Well, in the last few years, it ain't good. Let me give you a number, because I know some people like numbers. The National Gem Testing Center, which is the national lab of China, they have offices in virtually every major city in China. They test a ton of stones. How many? Well, let me give you an example. I was in a meeting in November in in Hong Kong, and there was somebody from the NGTC there, and we were talking about jade and measuring properties of jade, and they said, we have some data on that. And I said, how much data do you have? And we said, probably 2 million data points. People in the West don't understand how big China is. 2 million data points just on the properties of jade. Okay? So you can imagine the Chinese bought a lot of diamonds. Bought a lot. And what happened? The diamonds started to be sold, synthetic diamonds started to be sold, and when the price crashed, the Chinese lost confidence in the jewelry business. Now, when Stuart and Brecken were talking earlier about the trends and so forth, and they mentioned that China was down. Yes, it's really down because of the deception of some gem dealers calling things laboratory grown. What a stupid name that is. A laboratory is a place, but it's not the place where it's grown that matters. Imagine if you moved your press into a toilet and you grew your diamonds there. Would they be lavatory grown diamonds? It's not the place where the stone is grown that's important, it's the who. Who is doing it? Is it done by nature or is it being done by humans? So we need to stop using these weasel words like lab grown or even factory grown. These are synthetic stones or man-made stones or artificial stones. Let's not mince our words. Otherwise, we'll end up doing to ourselves what has happened in China, where we've destroyed confidence in the gem and jewelry market. Okay, so wrapping things up, standardized grading, is it possible? Well, the fact is that traders don't know enough science to describe gems accurately. Gemologists don't know enough about trading because they never buy and sell stones, and so they don't know how to describe gems accurately. Describing the color of faceted gems is beyond language. I love this quotation. It's from a book on Mayan color. The act of seeing far outstrips the ability of language to name color. An infinity of perceptions have no match in a finite series of labels, no matter how inventive or poetically conceived those labels might be. So who's the fool? Me. Me. I once believed colored stone grading was possible. And then I started looking at stuff like this and trying to describe it. You know, there is no thing in our laboratory that causes more arguments between my wife, my daughter, and I than trying to describe color. And it's been tough. Believe me, it's been really tough. I've lost my hair, my hearing is gone, my palms are sweaty, my arms are heavy. It's gotten so bad that I've started eating my neighbor's pets. All this because of trying to describe the indescribable with an inadequate tool, words. And don't even try to mention paparazzi. Oh, God. So please take pity. Think of the children. Teach them well. Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be color graders. All right? I'll leave you with this. What makes a gem special? What makes it special? Think about it. I love this from The Little Prince. Grown-ups never understand anything for themselves. It's tiresome for children to be always explaining things to them. I know that if I take a fine piece of Paraíba tourmaline and throw it into a parcel of ordinary tourmalines, a child will pick it out every single time. If I do the same with a cobalt blue spinel and throw it into a parcel of ordinary blue spinels, the child will pick it out every single time because it's special. So remember this, Gemology's first commandment, repeat after me, everybody here, come on, faceted gems are not one color. So now you can say you do know jack about color.
Hey,
All right, we got a few minutes left that we can talk and take some questions. Remember, I've lost my hearing, so speak loud.
speak loudly, please.
So whatever happened, I mean, a few years ago, Dublin was talking about doing their grading on, their numbered grade on gems and, similar to what they were doing with wine, because 75 plus and saliency was part of it and this and that. And like,
Yeah, I had a conversation with Daniel about that just a couple months ago. He's the director of Google Lab, and I said, how's that going? And he said, well, not as good as we had thought. These things are, you can't describe them numerically. Can you imagine trying to put a number on a painting? It's a stupid idea.
Go ahead.
And I've
right.
had to learn that the hard way.
Go ahead right here.
So I know with the nomenclature, and there was a lot of discussion in the past with the Paraíbas to call them Paraíbas when they came from the mine, and not just the general copper bearing, and
Right.
like the Santa Maria where they came from, the Santa Maria mine. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, Paraíba is the name of a place, and that's where the name came from. But the name didn't come because it was called Paraíba. The name came because the stones were really special. And so nature being what it is, if you dig up something that's equally special somewhere else, well, people will probably apply the same name to it. Unless the colored stone trade wants to come up with a source-neutral name, then naturally people will call it Paraíba or Paraíba type. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I have a little bit of a question because I want to pick your brain about the fact that since you've been going back and forth to China a lot.
You're going to have to speak up because, like I said, I've lost my hearing. You can see my hair is gone.
So it's mostly about the Chinese trade and how they're dealing with jadeite right now. Dealing fine arts, that's my area.
Yeah.
Like art itself. I mean, some of it's jade. It's like what you've been discussing the whole time. You cannot pinpoint anything when it comes to value. It's extremely difficult. I wanted to know what you're feeling in the trade in the jade market right now in China as far as fine arts go. Is it strong? Is it coming down? Is it following the jewelry trade?
No.
Or is it completely with...
Okay, the question is the Chinese jade trade following the rest of the jewelry trade in decline? Well, jade is not the same as other stones in China. There is a cultural significance that runs so deeply that it's not going to be subject to the same vagaries as other kinds of gemstones. Okay, China probably absorbs a minimum of 90%, might be 99% of the world's jade, meaning both nephrite and fei chui. And so the Chinese, they know jade. And so, any other thing?
Dick, sort of a follow-up on that. Is there an abuse of the word fei chui?
Okay.
Like pigeon blood and something like that?
There is a discussion underway right now in the gem trade, international gem trade, for renaming jadeite. We know that jadeite is an improper name because it's the name of a mineral species, and the stone is actually a rock. And you can't name a rock and a mineral species the same name. Also, the name that was given to jadeite was coined by a Frenchman in the 1860s, and Chinese already had a name for the stone. So there's precedence there. Normally in mineralogy, precedence is important. If something was already named by somebody else or already discovered by somebody else, they get the chance to pick the name. That was not done in the case of jadeite. So there are a lot of problems with the naming of it. We wrote a whole book on the subject. Unfortunately, it's out of print, but that is the problem.
Yes.
Just having heard your talk on color, I'm curious to hear your opinion on whether labs should grade not just origin and authenticity, but provide a description of color as well.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
The question is whether labs, in addition to describing like origin and authenticity, should also be grading color.
My personal opinion is that color grading for faceted colored stones is a disaster. It's a little bit easier with something with a uniform color like fei choy, but for faceted colored stones, they're exceedingly difficult to describe in words, and I've tried to convey that with the presentation.
One last question.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah, actually, two totally unrelated things. First, for a faceted material, you can measure the light paths using ray tracing, if you're so inclined. So computer model. The second thing is that perhaps alexandrites are named for Alexander rather than the Sri Lankan prince.
I'm sorry. I really can't hear. If you wanna speak, grab the microphone.
That alexandrites are named for Alexander because they had big night parties in Russia.
That's the story.
Right.
The fact is that alexandrite was discovered during the reign of Alexander, and the fancy story is that the miner that dug it up thought it was an emerald and brought it to the Tsar to show him. He thought it was an emerald because it was in the daytime. He brought it to the Tsar at a party at night, opened it up. Oh, wow, you're giving me an amethyst. Off with your head. Okay? And that's the story. I doubt whether it went down that way in actuality, but that's the story about Alexander.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dick.
All right.